what do Donald Marshall, David Milgaard, Guy Palmeran, Thomas Sofino, Ronald Dalton, and more recently Eric Morgan have in common? These are just some of the names of Canadians that have been wrongfully convicted as a result of a false confession. The false confessions were obtained using the highly controversial Reid interrogation technique. In brief, the Reid technique is a psychologically coercive method of interrogation with the sole purpose of extracting a confession from an accused. According to Smith and colleagues, although the Reid method may be an excellent tool for extracting confessions from guilty suspects, there are elements of the technique that create situations that put innocent parties at risk of confessing to a crime they did not commit. In other words, the Reid technique accompanies a margin of error. Are we comfortable with having a margin of error? If so, what would be an acceptable margin of error? Better yet, how does this integrate with the old adage, it is better to let 10 guilty men free than to lock up one innocent person? Finally, consider what if that innocent person was you or a loved one. There's a common misconception out there that truly innocent people will never confess to a crime they did not commit. I mean, the sheer thought of confessing to something you did not do makes one cringe. Like, why would anyone do such a thing? In order to better understand the reasons why one would falsely confess, we must first understand the inner workings of the Reid technique. The Reid technique is a method of interviewing and interrogating a suspect. The method primarily involves psychologically wearing down the accused to the point where a confession is made. For example, James Tratham, a former Washington, D.C. police detective and author of the book, An Inside Look at the Interrogation Room, stated, "The Reid technique is not intended to be a conversation. Rather, it is a one-sided monologue. It generally involves 9 steps that include direct confrontation, theme development, stopping denials, overcoming objectives, retaining the suspect's attention, handling the suspect's mood, the alternative question, having the suspect orally relate details of the offense, and converting the oral confession into a signed confession." Yet, there are inherent problems with this technique. For example, in the theme development stage, the interrogator provides moral and psychological excuses for a suspect's criminal behavior. The themes are sometimes heavily ingrained to the point where an innocent party begins to believe the narrative offered by the investigator. Another example includes stopping denials. If the suspect attempts to deny their guilt, the Reid technique encourages the investigator to hold up their hand in a blocking action, telling the suspect that they just need to listen for a minute, and offering the suspect another rationalization. Let's pause here for a minute and see how the Reid technique unfolds in practice. I want you to pay close attention to the officer's theme development. Recall, this is where the police make up a narrative for the offender to consider. Also, pay close attention to the officer's attempt at stopping the subject's denials, the strategic placement of each individual in the room, and how the officers intentionally increase the suspect's level of anxiety.
So that means that we've got that one round that deputy witnessed you pull the trigger.
You did it. You made a mistake, dude. You discharged a firearm in public. That's a misdemeanor, brother. And we could tell you weren't trying to hit the deputy because we know the trajectory of the round.
We have an eyewitness who puts a gun in your hand. No, you don't remember up to a point. You remember the whole thing.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do.
I do not.
Yes,
Honest
you
to
do.
God, man.
Oh, no, I'm being honest to God, and so is my partner, and so is the deputy that witnessed you because he broadcast it over a radio. And we're pulling the tapes right now. We're pulling the dispatch tapes. And you know what those dispatch tapes are going to describe? You. Holding a gun. But I'm going to tell you something. You sit here and you hold on to this story. I'm just telling you, it's not a threat. When we put all of the evidence together in a court of law, it's not going to look good, my friend. It's not going to look good. We know you did it. You know you did it.
And everyone in the house says that too?
What do you think? Do I really have to answer that question?
In addition to the inherent problems associated with the 9 steps outlined in the Reid technique, Other considerations add to the likelihood of false confessions. For example, the interrogation setting. This is also known as the location. Confirmation bias, police trickery, systemic discrimination, the pressure to close cases, unreliability of the confession, and the duration of the interrogation are all elements that increase the likelihood of false confessions. I argue these interrogation techniques must be eradicated from Canadian policing agencies. Instead, other methods such as the peace model that is utilized in the UK and greater reliance on scientific evidence must replace the coercive Reid technique. Are you still not convinced? That's okay. I ask you to consider the 5 following statistics. 1. According to Sal Casson, on average, lay people are only 54% accurate, and that police, judges, custom inspectors, and other so-called experts that utilize the Reid interrogation technique perform only slightly better, if at all. 2. In the USA, according to the National Registry of Wrongful Convictions, as of December 15, 2015, they had identified 1,717 wrongful convictions, of which 218, or 13%, involved a false confession. 3. The behavioral analysis interview, this is also known as the BAI, is a subcomponent of the Reid technique. It generally involves a set of 15 predetermined standardized questions designed to elicit differential responses from innocent and guilty suspects at the outset of a police interview. According to Casson, in a 2006 study by Reid and colleagues, participants engaged in a mock crime while other participants did not. All participants were then interviewed about the crime using the BAI questions. Overall, the results showed that verbal and behavioral responses to the questions did not significantly distinguish between truth tellers and liars in the Reid predicted manner. 4. According to the Public Prosecution of Canada, the causes of false confessions have been determined to potentially include both characteristics of the individual that make them increasingly vulnerable to providing a false confession, and also the nature of the tactics used by the police in questioning the subject. Problematic police tactics identified in the literature as potential contributors to false confessions include lengthy interviews, accusatorial and guilt presumptive questioning styles, and the use of false evidence. And number 5. In 1955, one of the co-founders of the technique, Mr. John E. Reid himself, interrogated murder suspect Daryl Parker. After interrogating Parker, Reid obtained a confession that later sealed Parker's conviction. Decades later, with the use of science, Parker was exonerated from the conviction and received a $500,000 award for the wrongful conviction. I argue, we are at a critical point where the Reid technique has proven to be ineffective. Canadian policing agencies must abolish the use of the Reid interrogation technique. The literature suggests that confrontation, police trickery, and deception are not effective ways in obtaining a confession. Instead, we must place greater emphasis on scientific evidence, which has shown to be more reliable. For example, the field of forensics and the use of DNA are powerful criminal justice tools that can be utilized by investigators. I close with asking you to consider the following passage. In law, they say that if there is a bias in an investigation, the bias should lean toward the suspect's innocence. Anything else is a miscarriage of justice.
Whoever killed Mikey Spence, for whatever reason, got away with it. The officers who botched the homicide investigation moved on in their careers, unquestioned, unaccountable. Their failed investigation cost Eric Morgan years of life. His businesses went under. He's estranged from family and community. In therapy for emotional and physical damage suffered while in prison.
He'll never be the same. He's been destroyed. Justice prevailed. Not for Eric Morgan. They shouldn't have happened.